Hello friends, in today's video we're building an enclosure for an Acrocanthosaurus. This is going to be part of a new mini-series where I build alphabetically an enclosure for all the dinosaurs and mammals found in Prehistoric Kingdom. Firstly, I wanted to have a walk-through habitat for the Acrocanthosaurus. And I know what you're thinking, ravenous carnivore looking up at its dinner. What could possibly go wrong? So, I knew I needed to cover all bases with this build. A platform high enough that the Acro can't take a run and jump at our guests. I mean, if it did, it would get stung by the high volts of electricity thanks to our double security system. So the Acro can't jump up, and if you're stupid enough to be a guest who wants to climb into the habitat, well, we've covered that as well with our catch system for our idiot guests. From that point in, I knew that this had to be a sunken enclosure. I used the terrain sculpting and the walk-through platform as a guide to how tall the enclosure needed to be. And in true PK fashion, I outlined the rest of the habitat using the terrain paint. With the boundary now securely in place, and yes, I did make sure that it was large enough for our Acrocanthosaurus to frolic freely, it was then time to move on to the guest facilities. So I started to build this platform up at the top here. This area would be the start of the walk-through habitat. I used some glass to imply some sliding doors. As I wanted this habitat to be multiple layer, I then decided to go ahead and start building our staircase down to the lower section. This was a little bit fiddly and it is very blocky at the same time. I tried to make sure that there was enough windows so it wouldn't be too claustrophobic. I then decided to outline the bottom of the area and put in some of the windows. This would allow our guests to look out at the Acrocanthosaurus and see them freely frolicking in the paddock. From this point I went back up to the top to make sure that the platform for our walking guests would be secure enough. I toyed with the idea of putting glass on the top barrier here, and it's something that I go ahead and change later on. The reason for this is I felt that it was a bit too blocky, and the reason why I kept it in is to just showcase that it's okay to change your mind when you're building things. So next I decided to move on to the staircase for our guests to allow them to come down an opposite way. I would got to say that this section was a little bit awkward to build. I wanted there to be a staircase, but the guests actually found it a little bit hard to traverse over. These steps are a little bit too steep for them, and yes, you can use the in-game ones, but curving them around is a bit of a challenge. So I decided just to go with it and create this really awkward looking staircase. When I kind of finished it off, it made me think of the Titanic, how when Jack comes down the staircase and he looks at Rose. Or is it the other way around? No, it is the other way around. Rose comes down the staircase and looks at Jack. Anyway, the Titanic in this build do not relate. Or do they?
Good evening, sir.
I then used the same technique as I did before about creating this circular pathway. This was just because I wanted it to look a bit more fancy, if you will. I then deleted all of that to try and create these steps that were coming down. You can see here that there's loads of steps and it is way too high. But trying to get everything lined up again is a bit of a challenge, especially because building something like this, I kind of experiment with the bare bones of things, make sure that the structure looks kind of sound but also interesting enough for guests to appreciate the build. So this is me basically just going away and creating the outside of the build. So I knew that I wanted it to be kind of like a Colosseum almost, that it's like almost like a fighting pit. So down where Jack or Rose are waiting for us, that is where you can view the Acrocanthosaurus. But at the same time, I wanted it to make it just look that little bit more interesting. So again, I'm going back and toying with the steps here, making sure that they all line up. And then jumping again to making sure that our Colosseum is structurally sound. I knew that I wanted this whole thing to be sunken, as I said before. So here I am just making sure that it is all raised up to the correct height. I'm then putting in some rocks, just to give it a little bit more variation with textures here. The concrete makes it very smooth, but it's also very cold, and I wanted something a bit more light. But again, it has to be structurally sound because we do have very hungry Acrocanthosaurus inside. Now this is a lot of cleanup, and I thought I would just keep it in to showcase how fiddly building things can possibly be. So here I am taking smaller pieces, stretching them out and getting the angles right. Sometimes it doesn't overlap perfectly, but to be honest, it does look quite smart at the end, especially at night time. Here I am just popping in some planters as well. So now I'm working on the pond, if you will. The water feature is probably the more correct term. So again, I'm just popping in some features that I think is going to look nicer. I mean, safety is a big feature probably in any kind of park which does have a massive dinosaur in it. So these are the structures that I decided to go for. It is glass, which, you know, it does stop the kids from jumping over it, and it kind of looks more modern and nice. One thing that I've not included in the speed build is when I put in all the light. Towards the end, I'll showcase exactly what I mean by that, because I did really heavily focus on the lighting of this whole build. So again, I'm just putting in the structures and then moving on to the staircase. Now, Jack and Rose would be proud of me. I made sure that it was structurally sound, but also I wanted to make sure that there were certain areas that just looked a little bit more natural. So I decided to put in these planters along the bottom. I thought about putting some flowers in here, and to be honest, it would probably look a little bit better. But with so much foot traffic coming along here, I decided to change it into gravel, just in case anyone lost their footing coming down. Because let's be honest, there's no handrail here, so you could either yeet yourself over to the left hand side into the gravel, or the right side into the water feature. Hopefully none of our guests are stupid enough to do that. So this took a bit of a while to try and get it all lined up, but the second side was obviously a lot faster, now that I knew exactly what I was wanting to do. I then went back up to the top bit that I wasn't really happy about before. Again, because the structure is very heavily based on concrete, I just felt that little bit of pop of colour would make it look better. And then along with some foliage, which I did think about cutting this out, but I just wanted to showcase how you can use different foliage, different rocks, wood pieces, and just place them down however you like. It doesn't really matter the structure or the way it looks, because let's be honest, foliage is foliage, just like a tree is a tree, my friend. And then I decided to put down some rocks. This is just a bit of guidance so that our guests know not to go over to that section. And then I decided to start on the walkthrough habitat area. So I knew that I wanted this to curve round, and let's be honest, the whole build is a bit of a shambles. It's very difficult to take something and curve it around with the pieces that we've got. However, you can stretch it out, and if I would have time and patience, which currently I just don't have at the moment, then I would probably go back and fix all this. But at the same time, I'm thinking about using this build for something else that I've got going on. So stay tuned, you might see this in a second version. But anyway, here's me just trying to make it all lined up. And yes, I did give up eventually. So now I'm just figuring out how the guests are actually supposed to get into this habitat. The main feature of it is obviously it being sunken down, high security, and also modern enough to make it pleasing. I then started working on the outside of the habitat, mainly putting in a lot of foliage, and then back to the security features. Now obviously you could easily yeet yourself off of here, and that's not what we want, because claims are not my speciality. But if you did want to complain at all about this park or the structure or anything else that you may be concerned about, we have started building our guest facility area down at the bottom. So this is mainly a place where our staff can come and sit, answer all your questions about the Acrocanthosaurus, and also get tickets. Now I've used quite a lot of my prop buildings here for our staff room that are actually available on the workshop. So if you want to go and download them, I'll put a link in the description below. And then I'm just basically jazzing it all up with some information boards. Now when I built this, we didn't actually have information boards available. That came in one of the most recent updates. So even though I wish I maybe would have put in what we currently have in game, I kind of like how this turned out, and it gives it a little bit of more variety as well. So this is me just popping in some text, and again I've made sure that it's just a different size of characters as well, just to make it a little bit more interesting, and just laying it out as well to make sure that it fits up all the space. So staying with the bottom platform here, I've decided to put in more security around the windows here. Now these are absolutely massive bars that if the Acrocanthosaurus did get a little bit too close, a security light would then flash up to then put these bars automatically across that it can't obviously get to our guests. And again, I'm a sucker for the detail when it comes to making custom boards. So here's our Acrocanthosaurus in a very tropical environment, and again I wanted it to have information so you could read up about where the Acrocanthosaurus is for, what kind of time period it lived in or currently should have lived in, and then this was just an endangered species indication to say that the Acrocanthosaurus is in this time period and is it critically endangered. Well, let's be honest, all dinosaurs are because they're currently extinct, but yeah, just a bit more fun and information for our guests. Now we've came to the part that you've all been graciously patiently waiting for. It is actually the habitat build. Now this, again, sunken habitat, I wanted there to be some natural rocks to blend in with the scenery. I didn't like the idea of there just being this drastic dip and then maybe having a habitat barrier around it. I wanted it to blend naturally into the rest of the habitat. There would be security fences probably at the back of this, but to the guest eye you would be able to see them. So now I'm just roughing up the textures of the terrain paint here, making sure that there's some areas that the Acrocanthosaurus wouldn't probably be roaming too much in, and other areas that there's going to be heavy foot traffic. Now you did see before that I have roughed up the textures of the habitat with some dips and bounds and all that kind of goodness. However, I always think that rocks are a staple for any kind of build in Prehistoric Kingdom. It just makes it look a bit more rough and ready and genuinely better. Then I'm selecting the tree brush here and putting in the appropriate plants and foliage for our Acrocanthosaurus. Now I will have to admit that during this process I decided just to spam trees absolutely everywhere, which maybe if this was in a challenge scenario then the Acrocanthosaurus wouldn't require this much foliage. But I was trying to keep that in mind in having some low lying plants rather than having big massive trees. Next I'm working on the filtration system for our pool here. I particularly never put in the speed build of this because let's be honest, do you really want to see me popping down loads of plaster pieces? I don't think so.